This is the Devil's Guide to D&D. Devil's Delegate here, and I'm back for the second part of my project of giving origin spells to the pre-Tasha's sorcery subclasses. To catch up, take a look at my videos covering the first three subclasses, as well as the one on the Aberrant Mind and Clockwork Soul sorcerers. But to give a quick recap, Tasha's Cauldron of Everything introduced origin spells for the new sorcery subclasses, something many players have been wanting for years. The addition makes the older classes weaker by comparison, and they lack the identity that having flavored spells and the ability to cast them without components supply. Since the 5 previous subclasses need an update, and Wizards of the Coast is likely not to supply it, it's up to DMs, me, and the Devil. The spells should be a combination of ones already on the sorcerer's list and ones from all classes, as long as they supply the proper flavor. Some should be generally strong, but more should be situational, and a few can even be weak. But hey, they're free. In Part 1, I covered Storm Sorcery, the Draconic Bloodline, and Wild Magic. That leaves Shadow Sorcery and Divine Soul, and I'm talking about them from easiest to hardest, which brings me to Shadow Magic. First, what is Shadow Magic? Taking into account D&D lore and spells, and also the features of this subclass, with Shadow Magic we're talking darkness and shadow, and with it depression, fear, and unease, and thus psychic damage. Dreams and nightmares are part of it, as are illusions. But as the Shadowfell saps color away, bright, shiny illusions don't fit. Now in 4E, the Shadowfell was the home of the Raven Queen, and death and undeath, and so necrotic damage. But except for Ravenloft being relocated to the Shadowfell, undead creatures don't seem to be an important element now, and death takes a back seat to darkness and depression. So I'll be looking for spells connected to darkness, fear, and psychic damage first, and then nightmares and some illusions. At least ones that can't produce pink fluffy bunnies. There's also the issue of the subclass feature, Eye of the Dark. That supplies the darkness spell, and already allows it to be cast with sorcery points. If you don't want to alter the precise wording of that feature, then you'll end up adding 11 spells. The Devil and I are happy with 10 and the consistency that brings, so I'm going to include darkness in the origin spell list, but I'll have a suggestion if you go the other way. Alright, so starting at first level, the Devil gives us Cause Fear, for the second time as an origin spell, which is a lot of attention to a weak spell, one that could be replaced by an intimidation check. But it has an evocative description. You awaken the sense of mortality in one creature you can see within range, which is exactly what a Sorcerer of Shadow should be doing. First level spells don't offer anything connected to shadow or darkness, and the psychic damage and illusion spells don't fit. However, Bane decreases a group's capabilities in a way that suggests they are ill at ease or depressed. So that works. Now I've seen Fog Cloud suggested, and it would work if you reskin the spell. That is, instead of moisture in the atmosphere, it becomes an umbral haze constructed from shadow. But I'd rather not do that radical of a reskinning when I don't need to. And at level 3 comes Darkness, and Fog Cloud and Darkness fill similar roles, such that it's better to leave it to the sorcerer to choose if it wants 2 spells that are so similar. So, at level 3, Darkness. And with it, the other spell that demands to be included, Shadow Blade, which creates a sword of solidified gloom. Now, if you really don't want to change the eyes of the dark, then instead of darkness, the Devil suggests silence, which has a muting effect, the sort of thing one would expect in the Shadowfell. At 5th comes the wizard-only Phantom Steed, an illusionary creature made real by shadows and that fades after an hour. And also, of course, fear. 7th level adds Shadow of Moil, normally a warlock spell that wraps you in wisps of darkness, heavily obscuring you from others, dimming light, and acting as both defense and offense. And with it, Phantasmal Killer, which allows you to kill with nightmares, or try to. It's not that strong a spell. Finally, at 9th, there's Dream and Mislead. The first allowing you to climb into the dreams of others, either for a chat or to tear into their mind. And the second, an illusion coupled with invisibility and also coupled with spying. This list contains 7 non-sorcerer spells, a few powerful ones, multiple situational choices, and all of them flavorful. The devil and I are quite happy with these spells. Which brings me to Divine Soul and a big complication. Divine Soul sorcerers are granted access to the entire cleric list, as well as a single bonus spell. Overall, the cleric list may not be as strong as the wizard list, but the best spells on it are extremely strong, particularly those at levels 1 through 5, and interact with meta magic in powerful ways, such as allowing for the casting of Aid or Death Ward before a long rest with double the duration. A subclass with access to both those lists and meta magic could outpower every other subclass in the game, including those of wizards. But Divine Soul is held in check by its very limited number of spells. If a caster wants those great cleric spells, it has to give up many of the must-have sorcery ones. So dumping 10 more spells known onto the subclass, which can then be traded for anything on the cleric list, creates a monster. It's too much. So if you want to keep that access to all cleric spells, don't add domain spells. And if you want to add domain spells, cut off access to the cleric list. Now, I prefer the second choice, as I think that full access was a mistake, as the subclass doesn't end up being about an individual with innate powers of the celestial, but just a way to multi-class into cleric without having to pay for it. So I'm taking the route of adding 10 spells, and dropping the divine magic feature and general access to the cleric list. So what 10 spells, or 11 with a cantrip, do we add? Over the past few years, there's been a lot of suggestions of where to get those 10 spells from. One popular view is to have the sorcerer choose a cleric domain and take the domain spells. Now, that can be fun, but it's also incoherent. Doing it that way, you can end up with no cleric spells. Those lists weren't made for someone borrowing from the cleric list, but for clerics borrowing from other lists. And there's the issue of the Divine Soul's Empowered Healing, which allows for a reroll of a number of dice when a spell restores hit points within 5 feet. For this feature to function consistently, much less be any good, the sorcerer needs to know not only a healing spell, but one that supplies multiple dice of healing, and almost none of the domains do that. I've also seen the suggestion of just giving the sorcerer the most desired cleric spells. If you're thinking of Bless, Healing Word, Guidance, Lesser Restoration, Spiritual Weapon, Revivify, Spirit Guardians, Death Ward, Raise Dead, we are looking at this miles apart. This isn't a kid in a candy store with a credit card situation, just giving everything the sorcerer could desire, because then we're back at the Divine Soul being a tier above everything else. We're looking for spells that give the subclass a flavor, an identity, and gives it variety without making it unstoppable. And many of the spells in the cleric list are spells for a priest, not for what is basically the descendant of an angel. Looking at it that way, and looking at 5e lore, celestial races, and the class, that means a radiance creature, just light and damage, and one who heals. Okay, I can work with that. Although, wouldn't it be nice if we had a guide from WotC? Yeah, we do. There is another magical subclass looking into the cleric list, the Warlock Celestial Patron. And it supplies Cure Wounds, Guiding Light, Flaming Spear, Lesser Restoration, Daylight, Revivify, Guardian of Faith, Wall of Fire, Flame Strike, and Greater Restoration. Well, here we go. That's useful. Healing, and here we have an angel with fiery, radiant attacks, and just light. Now, I'm not going to take that completely. Firstly, because it's another class's list, and we don't want everything to just match. Also, the Warlock is a class that gains its magic from on high, like a cleric, instead of from within. So I want to avoid spells that give the feeling of a higher being tossing down aid, which means no Guardian of Faith. And due to that healing feature, we need at least one more healing spell. So, with that as a guide, and working off the idea that the Divine Soul is a creature of light, the Devil gives us Cure Wounds, Guiding Bolt, just like on the Warlock's list. And yes, that's Cure Wounds, not Healing Word. The Devil adds a cantrip, Light, as that is the basic nature of this subclass. At third, again like the Warlock list, there's Lesser Restoration. However, now Empowered Healing becomes a factor. There needs to be a multi-dice healing spell by 6th level, and 5th level will have better things to do. So it has to be here. So out goes Flaming Sphere, in comes Prayer of Healing. At 5th, I'm again matching the Warlock, as Daylight and Revivify are precisely the flavor I'm going for. Daylight creates 120 feet of illumination and dispels darkness. This is the perfect combo of spells for a radiant being that heals. At 7th, I'll keep the Wall of Fire, a solid spell from the Sorcerer's list, and remember we want some of those? To that, the Devil adds Death Ward, a fitting spell, and one that allows the Divine Sorcerer to still use one of its tricks. At 9th, we're ignoring the Warlock Patron and starting with Dawn, an area of effect radiant blast spell that supplies actual sunlight. And the final spell is a bit of a problem. I wanted to put in Wall of Light, a very situational spell that few sorcerers will choose to take, but has the right flavor, and would give the list a proper balance. Now, another really fitting spell would be Destructive Wave, at least in tone, but that's both a bit too powerful for this already strong list, and mechanically less fitting than it would be for the Storm Sorcerer. The Storm Sorcerer is forced to be close to melee combat, where that spell would come in very handy, while the Divine Soul should keep its distance. So the Devil's final choice is Mass Cure Wounds, again giving purpose to Empowered Healing. I admit it bothers me not having Wall of Light there, so take that as an alternative choice. And that's it. 5 subclasses, 5 lists of 10, or 11, spells. I hope you find it helpful. Next time, I hope to be back with a different topic, as there's a lot of material from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything to discuss. Till then, like and subscribe, keep playing D&D. And if you've ever watched an old movie and asked yourself, would I be cooler if I was smoking? The answer is yes. Yes, you would be.